Whether or not we realize it, the ancient world is all around us. Some things just endure. Today, we're going to be talking about one of those ancient, enduring subjects. Join us as we embark on a journey back in time, a trip around the world, and a voyage of the ages as we learn about the history of the cannabis plant. Part 1.
The story of cannabis is a long one, like a really long one. We find the first evidence of Cannabaceae, the ancestral family cannabis belongs to, during the late Cretaceous period. Scientists have discovered it in the form of fossilized pollen in scattered sites around Asia. Cannabaceae really came of age in a violent geologic period and region. Around 50 million years ago, the Indian and Eurasian continental plates were beginning to collide, neither wanting to subduct. This forced up and folded the continental crust, forming the beginning of the Himalayan range and the Tibetan plateau. The climate of the Earth was different then, too, more challenging. There was much more UV radiation and less oxygen. Ancient plants that survived this and similar periods tend to be hardy and adaptable, and the Cannabaceae family is no exception. Neither are its two most famous descendants, cannabis and humulus, aka hops, an essential ingredient in beer. Interestingly, it's been shown that to this day, cannabinoids confer UV protection to plants when grown in high-altitude environments. Beyond pollen, there's not a whole lot of direct fossil evidence to definitively date when cannabis actually became its own genus, but there is a leaf imprint believed to have come from the Oligocene era that strongly resembles cannabis leaves of today. So, this tentatively places the evolution of cannabis to about 23 to 33 million years ago, although this date is contested. There's also disagreement as to an actual geographical birthplace, but the Tibetan plateau is a strong contender, which would make sense given the plant family's long association with this area. Previously, it was believed that cannabis only left Asia and spread to Europe with human assistance, but recent meta-analysis disproves this. It spread on its own throughout Eurasia, as did humulus and another Cannabaceae family member, Celtis. The next important evolution in cannabis is its much later division into different subspecies, Cannabis sativa and Cannabis indica. Chloroplast DNA analysis tells us this happened around 1 million years ago. But why did it happen? Over the millennia, ice ages and warming periods would expand or contract cannabis's natural range and alter its surviving habitats. This would occasionally create bottlenecks, where the existing number of plants would drop to a low enough point that genetic drift started to occur, random mutations that pop up in isolated populations. Hence, we end up with Cannabis indica and Cannabis sativa, and eventually Cannabis ruderalis. Plus, as individual populations of these genotypes became geographically isolated from one another, they adapted to their local environments and even developed more unique characteristics. We'll talk more about cannabis subspecies later on in this series. But to summarize, we know that the Cannabaceae family is extremely ancient and that cannabis itself evolved before modern humans. It's likely that our earliest ancestors may have looked to wild cannabis as a food crop, or figured out how to use its fibrous texture to make rudimentary rope or clothing. And the truth is, we don't know. What we do know is that there is a difference between a wild growing plant and a cultivated one, and that humans have been cultivating cannabis since the Stone Age. Literally. Recent archaeological findings show we've been domesticating the plant for over 10,000 years. That makes it one of the world's oldest cultivated crops, and, as its use predates opium or coca derivatives, perhaps the world's oldest medicine. We see the first faint glimpse of cannabis use in the archaeological records, mainly in the form of plant matter, seeds, and pottery impressions. For the first few thousand years after domestication, it seems the cultivation was independently practiced in scattered locations across Eurasia. But around 10 to 12,000 years ago, that changed, and usage appears to have picked up significantly. This is believed to be linked to the emergence of a sort of proto-Silk Road linking Asia and Europe, what's occasionally referred to as the Bronze Road. There's an interesting parallel here with wheat, which was also first domesticated around 10,000 years ago, then burst into widespread usage around the same area and period that cannabis did. Both were useful plants. Both could be cultivated, harvested, traded. It reinforces the Bronze Road theory. At any rate, starting around 2500 BCE, cannabis begins to enter the historical record in earnest. We now see it at sites in China, Japan, Korea, Russia, and Siberia, and in diverse locations across Europe and the Middle East. The ancient Chinese have records of an emperor in 2737 BCE already experimenting with medical cannabis in the form of teas and infused oils. Now, however apocryphal the details of that story may be, it's clear that from the dawn of recorded history, people understood cannabis's medical benefits. In western China, at a large burial site from 2500 BCE, several braziers were found with the charred remnants of cannabis, likely left over from funerary rites. This suggests that ancient people understood its unique psychoactive qualities as well. Interestingly, analysis of the ancient cannabis found on these braziers had THC levels far exceeding wild varieties of the time, suggesting the Chinese were already selecting and cultivating strains for potency 4,500 years ago. But even if those other benefits didn't exist, though, the crop would likely have spread across the ancient world anyway. Cannabis grows very fast and is adaptable to a large number of environments. Its fibrous nature lends itself to excellent rope, textiles, nets, and clothing. The seeds are highly nutritious. They can be eaten raw or pressed into oil, and the leaves and stalks can be used as fuel or animal feed. By 1000 BCE, cannabis had spread like weed. We see it during this period in Egypt, in India, Assyria, and Persia. There's even circumstantial evidence of it in the Americas, possibly brought over by ancestors of the Vikings. Trade routes were opening up, understanding had evolved, and while practical uses remain the same across cultures, for textiles, fuel, food, etc., local medical usage and cultural significance varied greatly. In China, Egypt, and the Middle East, there are indications of psychotropic use, but these cultures all really excelled early on when it came to understanding medical cannabis. The Chinese identified it as useful in treating over 100 conditions, including menstrual problems, gout, and malaria, and used it as an anesthetic for surgery. The Egyptians used it as a pain reliever and as a remedy for eye troubles, similar to modern methods of treating glaucoma. In the Arab world, it was prescribed for seizures, inflammation, and as an antiemetic, again echoing our own modern usage. Indian culture also had advanced medical knowledge of cannabis, but prized it for its spiritual and ecstatic qualities, and for its reputed ability to bolster courage. It's referenced not just in medical literature, but in sacred religious texts, as a gift from the gods and a bringer of joy. India is also responsible for what is likely the world's first cannabis edible, bhang. Bhang is a sticky paste made from the ground-up leaves and flowers of the plant, which is then infused into beverages or foods. While associated with certain festivals and holy days, bhang is also seen in daily life, for medical or even recreational purposes. Given what we know about Greek and Roman culture, their practicality, their sophistication, their penchant for hedonism, they were probably big into cannabis too, right? Actually, no. Despite the wide range of foreign practices the Greco-Roman world integrated into their polyglot culture, cannabis was slow to be adopted and even slower to be understood. Now, it was eventually grown for use in sails, netting, fabric, etc., and there are writings referencing certain medical applications, mostly pain relief, treating skin conditions, and for nosebleeds, for both people and horses. There were a handful of subcultures adjacent to the Greeks and Romans, though, that were very much aware of the full psychedelic potential of cannabis. From the historian Herodotus, we have a fantastic first-hand account of the Scythians, famous for their ecstatic vapor bathing, and for their howls of pleasure afterwards. So, while the average Greco-Roman might have viewed cannabis the same way a modern person might view a supplement like St. John's wort or melatonin, we do know that for at least part of the empire, there was a real understanding that there was more to cannabis than just rope and horse medicine.